I'm James Mars, born a slave in Connecticut in 1790. My father was born in New York and was the slave of Reverend Thompson in Canaan, Connecticut. When the Reverend married a Virginia woman, she brought her slave, my mother, with her. That's how my parents met and married. In 1784, Connecticut passed the Gradual Emancipation Law, allowing me to be free when I turned 25. Also, slaves could not be taken from the state and sold down south. So when Reverend Thompson decided to move to Virginia, he demanded my family go with him. This didn't set right with my parents and they refused. He continued to persuade them with promises of freedom, but he mostly wanted me and my brother to go. Fearing that Reverend Thompson would kidnap us and take us to Virginia, my family moved in the dead of night from Canaan to Norfolk, where people were more supportive to protecting slaves. They hid us and refused to give us up to the Thompsons. In 1798, Reverend Thompson gave up looking for me and my brother and sold his rights to Mr. Munger in Norfolk for 100 pounds. I was told that I was to live and stay with the man until I was 25. I found that white boys were bound out until they were 21. I thought that rather strange. Those boys told me they were to have $100 when their time was out. They would say to me sometimes, "You have to work for 4 years longer than we do and get nothing when you have done, and we get $100, a Bible, and 2 suits of clothes." I had now got to be in my 16th year when a little affair happened, which, though trivial in itself, yet was of consequence to me. It was in the season of the haying, and we were going to the hayfield after a load of hay. Mr. Monk and I were in the cart, he sitting on one side and I on the other. He took the fork in both hands and said to me pleasantly, "Don't you wish you were stout enough to pull this away from me?" I looked at him and said, "I guess I can," but I did not think so. He held it towards me with both his hands hold to the stale. I looked at him and then at the fork, hardly daring to take hold of it and wondering what he meant, for this was altogether new. He said, "Just now, see if you can do it." I took hold of it rather reluctantly, but I shut my hands right. I did as Samson did in the temple. I bowed with all my might, and the fork came to me very suddenly. The first thought that was in my mind was, my back is safe now, 'cause Munger saw my strength and is no longer able to whip me without my consent. When I turned 21, I wanted to be treated in the same manner as the indentured white boys and receive $100, a Bible, and 2 suits of clothes. But because the Connecticut law said children of slaves stayed their master's property until they were 25, Mr. Munger refused to release me, even though he had promised me earlier that he would. But Mr. Munger eventually agreed to settle my freedom question through arbitration, and I agreed to pay him $90 to be released from the remainder of my service. I earned the money working for another farmer in Norfolk until I was 25 years old. After that, I returned to the Mungers of my own free will. I worked other places too, but when Mr. Munger's health rather declined and he finally sank down and was sick, I took care of him and his sick daughter until they both died. We got along and became friends. We got on so well it made me almost forget that I ever was a slave there. I got married and had 8 children and kind of made a name for myself helping to uplift my people. During the 1830s, I worked in a dry goods store in Hartford and served as a deacon in the Congregational Church. I lived a full life, working to make a difference. I wrote all about it in my book, Life of James Mars, a slave born and sold in Connecticut. Although born and raised in Connecticut, Yes, and lived in Connecticut more than 3/4 of my life. It has been my privilege to vote at 5 presidential elections. Twice it was my privilege and pleasure to help elect the lamented and murdered Lincoln. And if my life is spared, I intend to be where I can show that I have the principles of a man, and act like a man, and vote like a man, but not in my native state. I cannot do it there. I must remove to the old Bay State for the right to be a man. Connecticut, I love thy name, but not thy restrictions. I think the time is not far distant when the colored man will have his rights in Connecticut.